Hi, my name's Dale Adams of Planning Ahead of Time, and this week I'm speaking to Lisa. Lisa, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, Dale. It's so nice to be with you today in conversation. My name's Lisa Pahl. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I work out of Los Angeles. I've worked in hospice for 18 years and the emergency room for about 8 years. And then I'm co-creator of these two products, the Death Deck and the EOL Deck.
Well, that's actually how you and I met, is you were giving a talk at Lifting the Lid Festival about your death deck. And I obviously tuned in, had a listen, and was quite fascinated by it. So I thought it'd be nice to actually find out a bit more about you and really how you came up with the concept.
Yeah, so we launched the Death Deck in 2018, and it was a culmination of um, me experiencing time after time of working with families, both in the ER and hospice setting, just not being prepared for the fact that their loved one was going to die. And so I joined forces with a previous hospice patient, the wife of a previous hospice patient, Lori. So Lori and Joe were my were one of my hospice families early on in my career, and Joe was pretty young, and they just didn't have any conversations about what he would want at the end. And so when he was dying, it was really chaotic. And there were many family members with different ideas about things. And so we kind of came together years later, both of us kind of brewing on how we can support and help people. And we decided that we wanted to create something a little bit more lighthearted to try to get people over this fear of the initial conversation so that long before a cancer diagnosis or a medical crisis, that people have some practice having these conversations and that they have a place to return to later when these conversations are really needed.
Yeah, I actually speak to people about planning ahead of time and saying that it's really good to plan when you're healthy. When you're
Yeah.
healthy, life's good, everything's happy, because that way you can hold a conversation really as though you're sort of stepping out of yourself and talking about somebody else's circumstances, even though they potentially could become yours. And I think
Mhm.
that's what's quite important, is acknowledging what you want while you are fully healthy, capable of making those decisions, because you may not have that same mind when obviously things suddenly are becoming very difficult very quickly.
Yes, yes. And I think that's true because of emotions, but also just physical symptoms. I work with hospice patients that are so sick, and they're trying to wrap things up and get affairs in order. And, we're just focused on managing their symptoms, and they're still trying to wrap things up or have conversations. And it's really excruciating to watch. And then, of course, some families still avoid the conversation, no matter what we do. But I do feel like with tools and with people like yourself who are out in the community trying to help get the word out, that having conversations early leads to a better likelihood that your wishes are going to be respected, I think, because you're going to be able to think clearly about what you would like at end of life, and take those steps to make sure people know about it, rather than the franticness that comes when you're really ill.
When I've heard of people, of known people who basically found out quite late that they've had cancer, and they've literally got 3 to 4 months in which, well, to get everything organized, because that's what they've been given as the time frame that's left for them in the physical world. To spend that time then planning and sorting and trying to make such difficult decisions seems such a shame, when that's when they really want to be spending that time as quality time as much as possible with the people that they love. So hearing
Yeah.
what you're saying, that resonates.
Yes. And and also what I see is that people just run out of time. especially with advanced cancer, there can be a change in condition that happens very quickly. And so people can think, okay, well, we still have time to do these documents, we still have time to have these conversations, and then they're out of time. And I think that the other thing that's so important to think about is that when we don't make these preparations, we're really affecting the grief experience of our family members, because, you know, they're then spending the first couple of years of their grief sifting through paperwork and trying to get access to bank accounts and all of these things that are incredibly frustrating in normal times, but in grief and early grief, it's excruciating. Yeah.
Still doing that with my mom, who who died
Oh,
nearly 18 months ago, and I was somebody who was obviously learning and training to do end of life facilitation. However, my mum had dementia, so her capacity
oh,
had waned drastically, and we are still trying to solve something actually it's to do with overseas, which has made it much more complicated. What was in the
oh
UK
gosh.
easy, and again, I think people don't necessarily consider that if actually they have um, dealings overseas, not just in the country in which they live, it does make it even more complicated when there's a death. And that's something that certainly I now recommend people look at quite seriously, and make sure they're always up to date and that they've got somebody else who can deal with the affairs if they can't, because yeah, it's taken a long time. So with the death deck, you wanted something, as you said, that's, you know, maybe makes the situation lighter. So it's a game, is that right?
Yes, yeah. So you can play it as a game or you can use it as just a conversation starter. We created it with a game element to try to appeal to game night people, and so you can partner up and guess each other's answers and keep score. So if I guess your answer, we get a point. If you guess my answer, we get a point, and then what I found though is that people usually start out playing that way, and then the conversation just takes over, and then the score is left in the dust. But you know, because the whole purpose, of course, is just to get people in these conversations. And so the other way to play is to just kind of go round robin and ask a question and have people chime in on their answers. I usually recommend that people kind of answer themselves first, especially if they're playing with a group that's a little reluctant. You know, we don't want to put others on the spot if we're not going to answer ourselves. So modeling that for other people and being willing to be a little vulnerable usually opens the door. And then I start often with cards and questions that are related to things not as specific about your own death, so that it's more abstract, because usually that kind of is a little less intense for people to answer initially. But then the conversation ends up going there to stories of someone that's died or their own wishes about what they want to happen after they die. And so it's really just using creative questions to not trick people, but kind of use a playful approach to get in the back door of these conversations to lead to more rich conversations that are needed.
Okay. So you've obviously got the death deck there. Have you got a sort of a couple of examples that you could just pull one
Oh,
out and
sure.
let us know what there's somebody might receive if they open this deck?
Um, okay, here's one. If a drug were created to provide immortality, would you take it?
Mhm.
A, totally. Who wouldn't want to live forever? B, nope, one lifetime is plenty. Or C, maybe if I could lock in my hottest age.
Ah, interesting. Yeah.
Yes. What would be your answer, Dale?
Mine would be no. So I wouldn't want immortality.
I wouldn't either.
And
But
I was watching something recently where it was all about actually the value of money, and they started asking questions about, you know, I'll give you £1 million. The people like, yeah, wow, amazing, thank you. Okay, well, actually, I'm going to give you £10 million. And these people are like, okay, yeah, amazing, thank you very much. And they said, but the catch is that you can only live for another 24 hours. Do you still want it? And they all obviously said no. And it's, that was sort of, if you like, the proof that money is nothing compared to time. Everybody would give time over money, and yet we all strive for money at the loss of time, because we're working so much to create the money, but therefore we're giving away our time in the wrong places. However, what also comes from that is that by knowing that our time will come to an end, we live for today. We actually make more of our life through it. Don't get me wrong, I hope my life is long, but I certainly wouldn't want it to be infinite. You had the same view, and why is yours?
Yeah, I mean, working around end of life for so long, almost 20 years, I I see what often very advanced age looks like, and the quality of life, and so even the idea of in the emotional aspect of all of this, like with this question, what people will often say is, well, does everyone else in my life get to do that too? Because otherwise I'm just going to keep experiencing everyone dying, right? So if you're the only one that's going to live forever, then you just have a whole infinity time of loss. So that sounds horrible to me.
Yeah, there's a film. I literally watched a film a few nights ago. Can't think of the full title, but it's about a lady called Adelaide. Adeline, I think it is, sorry. And yeah, and she basically gets stuck at one age. And of course, everybody comes and go. Her daughter gets older than her daughter then looks like her mother, then looks like her grandmother, and it goes on like this. And I can't think of the full title, but yeah, really interesting to watch.
Yeah. So I'm good with you know, 85 or so. That feels just right for me. Assuming I have a good quality of life at that point, that's kind of my goal age. I'm not looking to break 100. I
Yeah, I'd agree
that's
with you
kind
on
of
that. So the Death Deck was the first deck, but obviously you also then showed the EOL deck. So you've got an end of life deck as well. What's the
yeah.
difference?
So we realized with the Death Deck, because it is using so much humor, and because we ask questions that are related to all sorts of things, like that question would not be appropriate to ask my hospice patient, um, right? Like that would be mean. So I think so we decided, we wanted a tool that end of life care providers could be using to facilitate conversations at end of life. So the death deck is it's meant to be played primarily before someone is sick, when we can be a little bit more removed, like you were saying initially at the start, when we're more removed about death and dying. And then the EOL deck is for those with serious illness or advanced age, where we want to use a little bit more of a sensitive tone. And so with that deck, we're really looking at what the uh, end of life preferences and legacy building. So instead of all of these random conversations about death and dying, we're really just trying to focus in on, what they want to hear, what they want to see, how they feel about visitors, how they feel about touch, how direct they want medical professionals to be with them when talking about the diagnosis. So really kind of getting into the specifics of the dying process.
Yeah. People don't always think about the actual circumstances around, like you say, the time up until a person dies. It's I'm somebody who will sit in silence in a car for hours without radio. In fact, the radio drives me mad, and I would hate to be in an environment where they've got the radio playing all day, or the TV on all day. And yet I know other people who hardly ever turn the thing off. I was going to say something else, but they don't turn the TVs off, and the radio's on all the time. And even when you're in their presence, they don't turn the radio down. They still leave it on and things like this. So it's even things like that you are important actually when you're in that time where you are, if you like, at your end of life, that you want to, if you like, determine the space that's being created for you. And that's what you mean by this, isn't it?
Yes, yes, it really is. I have people share with me all the time that they just hadn't thought of any of these things, right? And so the questions as they're asking related to even some questions related to spirituality and whether you would want a religious or a spiritual person coming in at end of life. There's just so many aspects that families and people aren't thinking about because they've never been through the dying experience, of course, right? And so the EOL deck is really trying to give people some prompts for things that often come up at end of life, and so that people can not just have an advanced directive, but have much more thorough understanding of what their person would want. And some of these things are intuitive. Like I like that you brought up that you like to sit in silence, because I've certainly been to some of my patients' homes and it's dead quiet, dead quiet. It's so quiet, and for me, we tend to be a house with music. And so for me, I will often say, oh, do they prefer silence, or do they usually have some music or something in the background to try to prompt the family to be thinking about the person themselves and not their own experience. And so I think that that's a great example of one of the things that we don't, in the chaos of supporting someone who's dying and very sick, all of these details often just get overlooked, and they can be really important to the person in the hospital bed. Yeah.
But you also mentioned the grief and how not planning affects the grief too. And I think also afterwards, as you say, during that time, it is chaotic. There's a lot of decisions to be made. There's a lot going on. Then you have the grief, which again comes in huge sort of devastation at the start. But as that starts to ease off, that's to me when people start questioning everything they did. They question if they did the right thing for the person, and they scrutinize the decisions, the time. They'll go over it and over it. And I think that's then again where some of the problems come in, if they don't know for sure that what they're doing is right. Because somebody may make a comment to them about, oh yes, but they loved classical music, and they're thinking, oh my gosh, I didn't play classical, I was playing them some swing, and one comment can spiral somebody very, very quickly in my experience.
That is, yeah, you really nailed it. I hear that time and time again. I make a lot of bereavement calls for our families, and checking in on them months after the person has died. And there is a lot of second guessing in grief. There's a lot of guilt in grief. There's a lot of, as you said, did I do the right thing? And so I do really feel like the more conversations we can have, the more confidence people have that they are doing right by their person, and translating to hopefully an easier grief experience too.
Absolutely. And for that, the death deck and the EOL deck will be so crucial to families. Now, I understand that you do ship overseas and internationally. So I know you're in Los Angeles and I'm in the UK, but how do people get hold of it and have a look at the death deck and sort of purchase it from you?
Yeah, so you can check us out at thedeafdeck.com. And also, in terms of following, we're on social media at the Deaf Deck. And yeah, there's also a way to reach out on the website if you want to get in contact. I love hearing from people. I was really excited to do Lifting the Lid this year because we finally had a way to ship internationally that isn't overwhelming. And so it's exciting to be able to be offering our products to people outside of the United States now.
That's brilliant. And thank you so much for coming on a chat with me and just telling the listeners a little bit more about it. So thank you very much, Lisa.
Thank you.